so glad to have our next guest back. Shouldn't call him our next guest because he has been on this podcast before talking about swing plane and plane mates. David Woods, you're looking thoroughly more professional than yours truly right now. How are you doing?
Great to see you, Mark.
It was great to see you. Hey, for the folks who did not listen to the previous podcast back during COVID in 2020, the lockdown, please reintroduce yourself. Tell us about you, what you do, how you came to where you are.
Well, first, hey, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. My name's David Woods. I'm the director of golf at the Vintage Club in Indian Wells, California, which is in
Still a
my
bucket
humble
list
opinion.
place of mine. It's still a bucket list place of mine.
Yeah, I was going to say, my humble opinion, one of the best clubs in America.
Uh-huh.
It's a wonderful spot for sure, and it's been my home for the last 15 years. And yeah, when I'm not coaching and being a part of the team here at the Vintage Club, I like to tinker a little bit with helping people play better golf through the invention of some training aids that have been very fortunate for me to have taken off really, really nicely. The Plane Mate previously, and now the ProSENDR.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I love a training aid that you can hit balls with. So that's why I'm on board with everything you do. And when I saw this one, I was like, yeah, got to have one. But first, you work with some elite players on the tour and such, but your son, he looks like he's got a little something going on there too, huh?
Yeah, he's a good player. Obviously, been around the game of golf his whole life, and has been fortunate to spend a lot of time around some very elite players, just by way of the club here. Jason Day, Matt Kuchar, both members here. Mike Weir, Justin Rose, and those guys have been fantastic to my son, which kind of makes him kind of feel comfortable in that setting for sure. But yeah, he's a good little junior golfer in his own right for sure.
Right. Before we talk about the ProSender, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm wearing mine. I'm going to keep my wrist in the operative position while I do this interview. I help a dad, a golf instructor deep down, who has a daughter who's a good golfer, and maybe other fathers or mothers or whoever who are wanting to guide their young child properly, because I find, my goodness gracious, for me personally, it's such a tough road to hoe where it comes to, being the instructor who knows stuff that can help them improve. It's still, stirring in them this passion really for the game. Share a little bit of that, please.
Absolutely. Yeah. And trust me, it's tough for me as well. It's probably been the best thing that's ever happened though, because it's allowed my son and I to spend a crazy amount of time together, which is really cool. But I think the biggest challenge for parents and their kids, when you're coaching your kids or even trying to get them interested in the game, is just maintaining their attention to the game when it's so difficult. And kind of how I did it early on when my son was literally 3-4 years old. I would bring him to play with me, and I would just sit him down on the tee and let him watch me play, and he'd find that entertaining to hear the ball leave the club face. And just as time went on, as he was old enough to be able, and this was an early age, maybe 4 or 5 years old enough to roll some putts and hit some chips, we made it a game where we were a team. So I would hit all the long shots, and then we'd get to the green, and he would be the team member that rolled them in, and we could kind of celebrate together as a team. And then as he got more proficient at the game, he would then go to chipping and putting, and then hitting the iron shot. And it was a great way to kind of not make it an individual sport at the time, and make him feel like dad and son were on a team together, or father and daughter. My daughter as well, I did the same thing with her. She's kind of not steered away from the game, but kind of put the game on pause because she's obsessed with dance and she's wonderful at it. So yeah, no, I just think with little kids, you gotta hold their attention. You gotta make them want to be out there. You just gotta be a reward at the end of the day. Maybe you get to go get ice cream or some reason to be there. You almost have to, bait them into it for a little while until they get the bug.
Yeah. It's fantastic advice, and I've got so many more questions about that, but I want to talk to you about this. And folks, you need to download or at least check this podcast out on YouTube if you're listening on audio, because David's going to show how the ProSENDR works. We'll talk about the value of proper wrist alignments, which I feel like are kind of the tip of the spear in good golf shots. But first off, I want to say that in the previous podcast, on the Mark podcast, Jim Waldron, who I've got massive respect for, spoke about you and what you were doing with this thing, the ProSENDR. And he talked about how he thought back to his days with Ben Hogan. Hogan would talk about the value and the importance of the trail wrist position. So kudos to you for coming out with this. talk about its inspiration before we get into it.
Absolutely. It's nice to hear that from Waldo. He's a great guy. Anyways, yeah, I've always kind of been obsessed with different positions of the hands and how how their importance relates to better ball striking. And just as I've gotten older, I'm 48 now. As I've gotten older and I've played less golf, I've noticed just over time, my wrist condition just gets real sloppy. You and I previously chatted about just, I think as people lose their mobility and they're away from the game a little bit, it's real easy to kind of get sloppy with your wrist conditions. And I think it's just incredibly important to proper ball striking. It just makes it so much better for everyone. And then there's this whole, conversation around how the wrist should be. And there's a lot of different, matchups that can be involved. You see, from a DJ to, and Colin Morikawa with that extremely, flexed lead wrist coming into the ball and what the body needs to do to make that work in that particular swing versus someone who's coming in with a more neutral wrist condition. And I just kind of got doing a lot of research on looking at the best over a long period of time over the history of the game and, what was the most common theme around the wrist conditions for all these years. And to me, it just, is overwhelmingly more of a neutral position, flat left wrist or lead wrist, extended trail wrist, kind of an Adam Scott, if you will, kind of the model of flat left wrist and just looking like that picture perfect swing.
I need to interrupt. I'm having a moment with myself here. There are two things I'd like to observe, and then I'll let you go. First off, I'm so thankful for you. I'm so thankful that you would say this because on Twitter and all these social media places nowadays, it seems like the loudest voice is the most influential, right? And I couldn't think it's farther from the truth. I mean, on my desk right over there, and there's one on my bedside table, I have a selection of books, and one of them is Golf My Way by Jack Nicklaus. And in that book, he talks about 3 wrist conditions. He talks about cupped, or for the modern day golfer, that's an extension, right? And then he talks about neutral, then he talks about bowed. He said he could play slightly cupped and be good. He could play neutral, flat wrist, and be good. This is lead wrist now. And then he could play the other way, and he'd spray gun the thing all over the show. But nowadays, we're seeing a whole lot of this bowed thing. And what yours does, it lends itself to neutral in that lead wrist, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, and valid point for sure. And Nicholas definitely was more of a cup, not really cup, pretty darn neutral. I've got a bunch of images of him, and that he was a pretty vertical swinger, right? Like he certainly wasn't a crazy shallower for in that regard. Obviously, trying to get the hands into that neutral position was kind of the goal of this, and I literally just doing arts and crafts in the garage, trying to figure out, okay, how can we create a mold that would lend itself to being in this position, but not forcing you or holding you into that position. Because we've all used training aids where you're kind of forced into a position. And as soon as you take it off, you actually go further the other way because resistance, if for example, we were being held into this cradle, we would actually be pushing against it, trying to fight it as we're learning. And then you take it off and you're actually worse. But with the ProSENDR, we're just encouraging people. They have to feel some motor skill learning by leaning it against the back of the cradle so that when you take it off, you actually might even go into a little bit more extension of that right wrist. So we're really just trying to make the golfer do a little bit more of the work, take a little bit more responsibility for your learning instead of just, something that only works on a video when it's on.
I want to, the point you make there is well founded, and I want to quiz you further about this because when I put the ProSENDR on my trail wrist and I situate it appropriately, I believe, when I just relax my arm, now the wrist can go through 4 conditions. There's ulnar and there's radial, and then there's flexed and extended, right? My right wrist, when I put this on normally, can you see how it naturally goes into radial over here? So
yes.
I'm just sitting with it, even without hitting golf balls. I have to really focus on getting my wrist more neutral. And for me, more neutral doesn't feel neutral whatsoever because of years of whatever. I don't know what it is. Is that
well? Yeah, and I think to your point right there, in the design of the ProSENDR, I purposely put a little lip here on the inside of the index finger. So if you purchase a ProSENDR and you try it on, you're trying to figure out where it's supposed to be exactly, it would be where the index finger is on the inside of this little lip here. Yeah. And the purpose of that is to try to limit the radial, because when people have too much radial, they also tend to go into lead wrist extension. So they get cupped and over hinge. And we're trying to prevent that. We want more neutral and limit some of that radial. And you know, some might ask, why do we want to limit the hinge? And to me, if the hinge is neutral, we're certainly not, this isn't, the purpose of this isn't to be kind of Steve Stricker no hinge. Yeah. It's to be moderate hinge, because that promotes higher arms, fuller turn, wider arc. And that, you know, that's the whole concept of creating width in the swing. That helps control the low point. We're not getting too steep. We're not dumping the club behind us. So yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of elements to the product, and I'll go through them as we continue to talk. Before we do that, because I'm a big one on understanding. I mean, everyone who comes on here brings knowledge and wisdom and insight and stuff like that. But I want the folks who aren't watching and who are listening in the car or whatever to understand, because you know, nowadays golf is using a bunch of more biomechanical scientific terms in contrast to like cupped and bowed and stuff like that. Yeah. Now, when we talk about radial, folks, radial is like if you had to try and get your thumb closer to your wrist, and ulnar is in the opposite direction, where your thumb moves farther from the wrist. And I'm with you. I mean, I noticed that when I got to the top of my swing, I was wanting to complete by allowing my wrist to go radial or thumb close to the wrist, because that would make the shaft look more parallel, because I was not able to rotate as far. And then on the way through the ball, I was that professional flicker, you know, and the right side would stall because I'm old and decrepit at 52. And then the club face would be a little unstable through contact. So for the folks who don't understand, the radial is if your thumb try to get closer to the wrist. You agree? Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, almost like the motion of hammering a nail. Yeah, would be radial ulnar. Yeah. So, you know, for, like you said, for folks that are just listening on radio, that's kind of what we're trying to limit. We want the lever to be more the lifting and like the elevating and the lowering of the arms added into the rotation of the body, and a little less doing it with your hands. Isn't it crazy? Because I wasn't here recently. Well, I shouldn't say that, because this is a podcast and folks might listen way down the track. But I was taking axe throwing here recently. And I tried to axe throw like the golf dude, and it was disastrous. Yeah. Someone said to you, you're going to keep the wrist neutral and just kind of make it out of the elbow. And lo and behold, as soon as I did that, that thing came out tumbling, hit the board, you know, axe tip first every single time, as opposed to clattering against the board and not working. I find that I just popped in my head. And I think it's important for the listeners to understand that the club face control is everything in the golf swing, right? Is where that club face is coming leading into the ball. Obviously, there's a lot of elements to the golf swing, but the hands are definitely the GPS of the golf swing. And I, you know, there's so many different ways you can move the wrists that if we can limit that, if we can make them more neutral, it allows us to be more consistent. A lot of people that are trying the ProSENDR, especially the tour players that we've tested on, we have over 50 PGA Tour players, LPGA players that are utilizing the ProSENDR, not just, you know, us sending them. You know, we're seeing all kinds of videos pop up where they're using them on the range at tour events, you know, to warm up. So obviously it puts you in a position where it can quiet down the hands a little bit. It gets you once again into a neutral position. And I think back to that concept of neutral, if we can have our hands more neutral, to where we don't have to rotate around quite as hard. And I don't want to confuse anyone. There's plenty of rotation going on in the body. There's no question. But I'd say the vast majority of golfers are not sitting down and whipping the hips open, right? Yeah, so we've got to find a neutrality that allows you to shallow the golf club appropriately, but still have an element of steepness, so we can take a divot for the people that are working a little bit more laterally and less rotary. I'm so happy you said that, because for every video everyone who's listening to this sees on social media, where you're seeing someone talk about laying the shaft down and turning the hips open and stuff, I'm like, golly, people, you got to understand that you got to have your wrists in a very, very strong club face closed position to accommodate that stuff.
and vice versa, because if you got to understand you're working around what your risk condition is. And I feel like neutral, given the predominance of golfers playing the game, we're not all
Yes.
Dustin Johnson or Brooks Koepka.
Right.
Neutral would be more advisable. Yet on social media, it seems the other way around.
Yeah, and I think there's a place for all that, though. There's so many young, talented, good players that are, uber flexible, can sit down, rotate around the corner, and that matchup works perfectly for them. There's a whole contingent of people. So there's a place for that. But I just think, this is an opportunity for people to, or maybe for a product to see a wider range of player to be able to utilize it. And I think, again, it goes back to just the theory of when I was doing research for this. If you look at the vast majority of players over the course of time who are in the Hall of Fame, they are pretty neutral. And if you take a look at just if you think of the top 5 or 10 best iron strikers in the world over the course of the last 100 years, and you look at the risk conditions at the top, pretty neutral.
Yeah, well, if I had to look at from my experience on the range, and last week in Mexico, now granted they're Foley clients, so they had the ProSENDR on. Ben Arn and Cameron Champ were practicing with it, and I could see in Cameron Champ how things just quietened. That sort of whippet action seemed to go away some, and so the distance control appeared with the irons to improve. But as I go to the preeminent ball strikers I typically get to call, iron game, I would say you got Rahm, you got Rory, and you got Justin Thomas in the middle of them. And then there's Colin Morikawa, who tends to John Rahm, but they, to me, are great iron strikers. You go from Bode to flexed-ish to Thomas, which is neutral. So they're working in that spectrum you're talking about.
Yeah. There's definitely, like, right now we're seeing kind of a variety of conditions for the best players. But I think if you look back over time, over a long window of time, if there was 100, I think you'd see probably 75% of those be more Adam Scott, Tiger Woods, Nicklaus, that type of neutrality. So, I mean, like, there's a spot for everybody. There's no question about it. It's just a matter of what you can do with your body to match up those elements you're creating.
Okay, cool. I want to now dive into this really cool little gadget. I love it, folks, because it's strong, it's molded, it's easy to use. It's kind of foolproof, really, if you think about it. And it does take awareness, because I got mine, and I went outside, and there's video of me practicing with rubber balls in the garden because I was so excited to get this thing. And the first few, I was like, dang, I'm not hitting this thing. And it took a whole lot of focus for me to try and fit my wrist in there, even at address to a certain extent, not pushing it against there, but to line up in a way that it made it easier, if you can see my hand there, to get it fitting into the mold. And then when I did, I felt like when it was in there, there was the awareness of retaining that relationship in the trail wrist through contact, where I would always stall like 3/4 of the way down, right side stops, hands flick a bit, and then I'm like left, weakish, right, thin every so often. And so it occurred to me that things I knew, that I had to rotate my body better to support this if I wanted to, that now I was like, okay, now I know that I'm in position. So now it opens me up. And I had some really solid feeling, easy to find the golf ball shots. If you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Easy to find the golf ball, right?
Your swing looked great in those couple of videos you posted there. It did. It looked fantastic.
I appreciate your confidence.
I think that, there's a number of elements that maybe I can just kind of walk through and give you the sense. So the purpose was to be able to address the golf ball without the aid touching you, other than the crate, other than the cuff attaching it to your wrist. We want people to be able to set up to the golf ball in a very neutral way. And then everyone sets the wrists at different times in the backswing, right? Some people are early setters, some people are very late. So, the concept would be to allow you to lay your hand into the back of that cradle when it's appropriate for your golf swing. Obviously, by, P3, 3/4 of the way back, we want to feel like that right wrist is touching the back of the cradle into P4 at the top of the backswing. And then, because you're not held into it, we want you to maintain that feeling, that touch against the back of the right hand, the trail hand, in transition. And that feeling helps create a little bit of shallow and allows you to get back to P6, which is the last time the shaft is parallel to the ground, where the center of mass, the club head, is trailing the hand path, which is critical because the body is rotating. If the club head gets too far outside of the hand path at that point, the path is going to work left. And that might be fine for someone who's trying to hit a cut, but the vast majority of people are trying to come back to the 0 line or a little bit in out. So we're just trying to create a situation where as you're leading into the ball, the center of mass is trailing. You're able to hit down with the appropriate amount of steepness by coming from a shallow position. So yeah, I mean, it does a lot, but it also allows you to come off the cradle from that last parallel to the ball. So I would say that the best players in the world are trying to get their hand off the cradle.
Yes.
So because they know how to line the shaft up.
Mm-hmm.
They know how to have a couple degrees of forward shaft lean, whereas most AMs have the problem the other way where they're scooping into the ball. Yeah. So for the average player, we're saying keep the back of that hand in the cradle as long as humanly possible. So you can learn to lean the shaft and compress the golf ball, but let those pros and the better players feel like there's a little bit of throw off the cradle as they're coming into impact. So, I mean, you mentioned Cameron Champ. Cameron definitely, he's a counter rotator in transition, so because he's so flexible. Mm-hmm. He throws a lot of lag down, shallows it really nicely, and then he drags too much lag into the ball, in his words.
Yeah.
So the ProSENDR for him, it makes him wider on the way back, less radial, less hinged. Mm-hmm. And then he's trying to throw the mass of the club head into the back of the ball and not stay in the cradle for very long so that he can have a higher ball flight, especially with his wedges. So it's unique that it works for all.
You know what I love too? One thing I've struggled with I've been teaching golf since 1996. I've struggled with the fact, and that's why I'm so big on understanding, where you have the concept and then you have the application of the concept, whatever it might be. And then some of that application, or the correct application, is being able to define to the learner, the user or whatever, okay, how, why, when this feels, And there's a when element to this too, because like the wrist set, when I put this on, how I used to sort of set my wrists, you can see I'm radial out of this cradle a little bit here.
Yep.
So now I'm learning to set it differently. And also it allows you that time element to say, okay, this is how they feel like they're moving, and then where you might be aware of the thing throughout the swing. So all of a sudden, I always draw the analogy where it's like coloring inside the lines.
Right.
At least you kind of know where the boundary is right now a little bit when you're using this. And I feel like that is so beneficial to learning properly.
Yeah, and that's enhanced by our website where we provide a variety of different protocol videos, mm-hmm. from unboxing the product to putting it on, setting it up, kind of running through. Here's how you utilize it in very slow positional sensations, and we'll continue to add to those as time goes on. But yeah, it's been exciting. It's we launched on January 31st. And the reception has just been off the charts. I should mention Sean Foley is a partner on this project, and that's where that ball you're holding in your hand comes into play. The compression sphere. It was interesting. Sean and I have been friends for years and years.
Before you go there, I do want to say the unboxing of the product. I'm one of those guys that never looks at the manual. And I slapped it on my wrist and I was out. I guess it was the golf nerd in me getting excited, but I opened it up. I'm like, okay, we'll get to that thing later. And I just put it on and went and try, out with a
off you go. Yeah. And you're not alone. Most people do that. That's why we, one of the first things when you open the inside of the box is a QR code that we're like, hey, before you do anything, scan this so we can show you how to use this properly. And fortunately, it's a product that's pretty user friendly. It doesn't take too much, intuitively you can kind of figure it out. But it is one of the only 3-in-1 products on the market where you can utilize it with the wrist cradle only, or you can remove the cuff and then just put the cuff on your wrist and attach the ball that you're holding in your hand to the inside of the wrist. And the reason that ball is small and very squishy is we want to get that ball right down in the wrist area. Okay. Because when you're squeezing the trail wrist into the lead wrist in transition, it further puts that right wrist into extension, which really helps you feel that connection for width and extension, and also helps shallow. So, we recommend you use the ball and cradle together for kind of like, think of Tommy Fleetwood style shots or half shots. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing people take full swings on social media utilizing it, and I'd say that's certainly the hardest, shot to use.
I want
when
to say
got
this.
them both together.
when you saying, okay, I've got my wrist in the cradle, which to me personally is the most important thing because I'm understanding less
Yes.
radial, more extension in the wrist.
Yep.
To then assume my grip with the left hand on there and create some compression in there, that
Yep.
takes a lot. It takes a lot of mobility and flexibility too.
It really does, and that you'll notice there, Mark, that ball squishes right upon itself. Like it's
Yes.
really squishy. So even when you're dressing the ball, if it feels a little awkward, go ahead and give it just a little bit of squish. We want the ball right down in the joint of that wrist. There's forces and torques that are applied to the grip during transit. Well, during the whole swing, but during transition, there's a lot of twisting and torquing of the grip, and that ball certainly aids in that. So when you feel like that trail wrist is pushing against the lead wrist, you'll feel the shaft kind of lay down a little bit. So that's just one more element, but you can also utilize that grip, that compression sphere for putting, for short little chips. It's great for. So again, it's you can use it the cradle alone, the ball and cradle together, or just the ball on its own, which is kind of unique. So you're getting kind of 3 training aids in one.
I want to talk about the sphere a little bit. Okay, so that's to squeeze between the forearms like this. When
Yep.
I've given this lesson before, I always used to use like a blow up beach ball and have
Yep.
it between guys' forearms. I personally I get a bit concerned because I will cheat this thing and kind of get my shoulders really internal, which is
Yep.
going to block me up in my backswing some. So talk to that a little bit too, because I feel like there's an extent, there's a flow here into the upper body, which is crucial as well. You agree?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, where you should feel the most squeezing is in transition, where
Okay,
we're
right.
getting that shaft to lay down a little bit, that elbow kind of tips in front of you, touch the trail elbow. And then think of like long armed pitch shots, half shots. That's where I think you're getting the most use out of that.
I see.
Feeling the width in your golf swing.
Mhm.
I think to your point earlier, the wrist cradle itself is certainly the prize winner of the whole product. That's where we're seeing the most gains from people, and the compression sphere certainly is a great add-on. It is fantastic alone for putting, for stabilizing the
Yeah.
wrist joints.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean we're seeing a lot, and the crux of that whole ball being added on there was basically from a long conversation Sean Foley and I had together, where he was kind of going over how he kind of brought Lydia Ko back from her, where she had kind of fluctuated high in the ranking, and then back to world number 1. He used a very small ball, very close to the wrists, to try to get her swing to feel wider, higher, more shallow, just to give her a little bit more connection. So in our discussions, we said, hey, let's just put this all together and build kind of like the ultimate product.
You've just really jogged my mind now, and you talk about that for anyone, listener, viewer who's struggling with a case of the narrows going back, with a big chicken wing going through, with the elbow split, even when putting, when the elbows start to work independently of each other.
Yep.
This little sphere here, that's kind of going to unlock your success, right?
It's really going to be good for that, for sure. And it's nice that like you can run it over in your golf cart and it's not going to break. It's real durable, and again, easy to use. It just velcros onto the inside of the wrist cuff, and off you go. So raking another ball over, grabbing another club. It's funny when I work with our guys. One of my students, Kevin Roy, who's a rookie on the PGA Tour, really loves utilizing the ProSENDR. He's used it a lot. It's helped him be wider. He gets a little radial at the top of his swing. It's really helped him create some connection and width in his swing. And I think that's probably what we notice the most is these guys get using it on the driving range. You see them on the PGA Tour, and they, after 25 balls, they forget that it's even on the wrist. You see them talking to people or shaking somebody's hand. They still got it on. It's kind of funny.
That's the best. That's the best vote of confidence and best word of mouth for you guys. Word of wrist, I should say. Hey,
Absolutely.
for the folks who like me and not going to scan the QR code and look at the drills, okay. I I want you to talk about, because I would expect. Now I'm talking one teacher to another kind of fireside. I would expect that the biggest mistake you see made with this thing is folks try to do it with their driver, or try to do it at high speed. Am I wrong or am I right?
Yeah, I mean, we've got guys smashing it with driver on.
Oh,
I
really?
mean, it is every club in your bag you can use this for. But I wouldn't recommend if you just pull out of the box, start hitting driver with it.
Yeah.
We want people to learn to chip with it, where you've got like the more traditional, think of like a Phil Mickelson kind of, his whole career is chipped more traditional, handle way ahead, ball back in the stance, feeling the forward shaft lean. And that's a shot that most amateurs really struggle with. Everyone wants to scoop it. So like we would encourage people to, start there, really try to feel that forward shaft lean with the back of the trail wrist in the cradle, work into kind of half shots and going up from there. I would really encourage people not even to add the element of the ball in until they're really comfortable hitting shots all the way through their bag with the wrist cradle on.
Yeah.
And then, kind of piece back in from there. We actually have some great video. We have some advanced protocol videos available for purchase on the website.
Oh, cool.
And we've had a few people say, "Oh God, you got to buy the instructions." No, you don't. There's 5 or 6 complimentary protocols on there that are very thorough going through. But for the swing dorks and nerds like us who really want a deeper dive, there's some advanced protocols on there that are about 45 minutes of Sean and I just going back and forth, kind of like deep dive about the product and how to practice properly with ProSENDR on. So there's a lot of content available.
Well, I would say from personal experience, in the learning phase of using it, I'm with you. I wouldn't go full. I would spend time really being physically aware of where the wrists are throughout the swing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you could use like a hack motion or whatever to show you the readings, but unless you're spending time really drilling what you're doing and almost reforming the habit, if you will,
Absolutely.
I feel like if you're going full speed, you're unlikely to be successful.
Yeah, we did a lot of research ahead of time, just how a product where you're not being held in a position can trigger some motor learning.
Okay.
And I'm by no means like a motor learning specialist or anything. So we spent a lot of time with Dr. Will Wu, who's a motor skills specialist out of San Diego here. He works with Mark Blackburn and a lot of tour players just on how some of the technical thoughts that a coach gives to the player can be translated by the motor learning skill specialist that Will is. And he really, when he, really did a dive into the product, really confirmed that just that touch, that sensory touch against the product really helps kind of trigger the brain to really know where to go when it's not on. And so there's really something there of not being held or forced into a position and making the player take responsibility for their own learning and learn how to lay it in there and be mindful, even in some slow motion practice swings. Like even when you do that right there, just kind of behind, I've got a theory that it could be totally wrong, but I feel like the toughest part of learning in the golf swing is any movement that's outside your peripheral vision.
Exactly.
Anything
Yeah.
above or behind your head is where I've always had the toughest time personally or with students of trying to get people to know where they are in space. When it's in front of you, I feel like it's much easier to have a sense of where you are. But anything that's up and behind you is tough. So trying to put your mind on the touch and the sensory of the product is really, really critical for learning.
There's no doubt about this because we've been talking for about 30 minutes. And folks, I've added on because, like I said at the start of the call, my trail wrist tends a little radial.
Yeah, me
And
too.
you see, if I put it down here, it's going to hit me right in my knuckle over there. So I've spent a lot of time during the call just kind of finding the cradle. And
Yep.
I'm finding I'm hitting it a whole lot easier now than what I was when I began because
Yep.
the motor learning is beginning to occur. So I guess, in front of the television, wherever it is, at the desk, you can start doing your golf swing a favor just with a cuff on.
Absolutely. Like put your hand at the top of the backswing for a second. And then without your lead hand on, just your trail hand on the product. And now put your finger straight out, like straight out. There you go. And now feel like you're painting over top of the golf ball where your palm faces the ball at impact.
First off, yeah, but first off, it's pulling on my forearm a little bit over.
There you go.
Okay.
Right? Because you're used to being a little internal. There you go.
Yeah,
So when you feel like that right palm now covers the ball on the way down, you can feel that right wrist stay in the cradle for a long time. And it's just a feeling that most people don't have as they transition from the top of the backswing down into P6. They get a little lazy with that trail hand and it comes out of the cradle. And then the club head's outside the hand path and they're wiping across it, which is probably the vast majority of students that you and I see. They get cutting across the ball.
Or you're a decent player like me back in the day, and then instead of wiping across it, you slide way forward to angle this part off to the right, then you never hit the target whatsoever. They'll heal weak right stuff.
Yeah, you get an
that's
excessive right side bend, and then you're rolling the face open or closed rather, and yeah,
sounds
it's
like a
tough.
Mark problem, I guess. David, it's fantastic. I need you to share for the folks where they can find it. Is it available global? We've got a global audience. Tell us a little bit about where they go.
Absolutely. So right now we are shipping in the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia, and we are very close to shipping worldwide. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of different. That was going to be phase 2 for us, but when we launched on January 31st, we sold out immediately, and then we've had 2 other drops that have sold out. So we're finally back in stock now after nearly 90 days of incredible success, which has been a lot of fun. And you can find us at ProSenderGolf.com. And if you want to just take a peek at the product, that's a great spot. We've got tons of tour players utilizing the product. You'll see them on the website. And by the way, we have not paid one tour player for endorsement of this product. There's probably, I don't even know how many, there's probably 12 or 13 images of tour players that are utilizing the ProSender on the website, on Instagram at ProSender Golf. And you'll see all kinds of swings on there. The guys have really kind of been excited to use it and great with lending their likeness, and it's been fantastic. So that's the spot, ProSenderGolf.com.
It's right up my alley. As I mentioned, I believe the hands and the wrists are the tip of the spear. If you're skilled in that area, you can make some good shots despite what your body's doing.
GPS of the golf swing.
Exactly, from the tee through the green. And again, I love training aids that you can use when you're hitting the golf ball. So I'm buying in. This is really cool, and I'm looking forward to getting out and hitting some shots myself, some shots in anger. Hey, for you, I want the folks to go and find you too. Where are you on social media and such?
At David Woods PGA is where you're going to find me on Instagram, Twitter a little bit. I don't spend a ton of time on Twitter, but at David Woods PGA is my Instagram.
And I know you're at the Vintage Club. Can folks get in there to get you for lessons, or is that
they cannot? Unfortunately, this is for members only here in the odd tour player that I coach. But yeah, it's a busy spot here, and we're happy to devote all of our time to our incredible membership.
So you can't get to speak with him, but you can listen on this podcast, and you can get yourself the ProSender. David, thanks for your time. This is great stuff. I appreciate what you're doing.
Be sure. Sorry to interrupt you. Just be sure also to follow Sean Foley Performance at Sean Foley Performance for Sean's Instagram. He's got a lot of great insight out there too.
The philosopher.
Yeah, the king.
Okay,
for sure.
Listen, thanks for joining us. I've loved this so far. I look forward to working with it more, and I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you so much for having me on, Mark. Appreciate it. Good luck.